He slapped me in front of 300 guests, sure it would break me. He was wrong. By the time I walked out of that hall, I already knew I wasn't losing a husband that night. I was losing the last reason I had to stay quiet. I still remember the exact shade of gold the chandeliers threw across the tables that evening. Soft, expensive, the kind of light that's designed to make you forget to ask questions. That was the whole point of the Windermere estate, I think. It wasn't built to host a wedding. It was built to make ordinary people feel small enough not to interrupt. I stood in the bridal room adjusting my veil for the third time, not because it needed adjusting, but because my hands needed somewhere to go. My mother, Kavita, had picked the dress herself, soft blush silk, the kind of softness she hoped might calm me. It didn't. That day didn't feel like a beginning to me. It felt like a verdict I hadn't been allowed to appeal. Only my cousin Farah noticed how tightly I was gripping my bouquet. She always noticed things other people were too polite to mention. Downstairs, Arav was doing what Arav always did best, moving through a room like he'd never once been told no. Tailored suit, a smile built for cameras, a handshake for every man who mattered, and a compliment for every woman who'd photograph well. He was, on paper, the perfect husband, the heir to a construction empire, about to inherit a fortune and a wife in the same afternoon. He found me near the stairwell, and for 1 second, let his public smile drop just enough that only I could see it die. "You're late," he murmured, barely moving his lips as a photographer circled for an angle. After the toast, we signed the transfer papers in my father's study. No questions in front of the guests. "Today isn't the day for your audits." I didn't answer right away. I'd spent years walking construction sites, arguing with contractors twice my age, and I'd learned one thing well. When a powerful man is in a hurry, it usually means he doesn't want you looking too closely at something. "What papers, Arav?" He smiled for a passing camera, sliding his arm around my waist like it was part of a script. "Formalities, estate adjustments. Rohan's prepared everything. You just sign where it's marked." Rohan Sabharwal. The name landed in my chest like a stone dropped in cold water. I knew that man far better than Arav realized. For weeks I'd noticed things, meetings that produced no minutes. Files disappearing off the shared drive minutes after I flagged an inconsistency. Messages deleted the second I walked near a screen. I wasn't even a Kana construction employee. I'd been brought on as an independent site safety consultant 6 months before the wedding. A gesture Arav liked to describe as an act of trust. To me, it had always felt like a door left open on purpose. A trap dressed up as an opportunity. The first dance came and went, the room clapping in that practiced rhythm people save for weddings and funerals. Arav's hand pressed into my waist harder than anyone watching could see. "You look distracted," he whispered. "Don't embarrass me tonight. My family took a chance on you, considering everything." Considering everything. I'd heard that phrase so many times it barely stung anymore. It meant no old money behind my name, no family legacy to trade on. Just a woman raised by a widowed mother who worked 2 jobs so her daughter could finish engineering school. He never said it outright. He just let it hang in the air, like dust on furniture too expensive to touch. "I haven't embarrassed anyone," I said, looking past his shoulder to where Farah stood frozen. "But I don't sign anything I haven't read." His fingers tightened. "You'll sign because you're my wife now." No raised voice, no performance, just certainty, flat and absolute. And that's the moment I understood, really understood, this had never been a wedding to him. It was a transfer of ownership with a ceremony stapled on for show. The study smelled like cedar and cold air conditioning. A folder sat on the desk beside a fountain pen, 3 copies of a contract fan beneath it, each page flagged with a red tab. Rohan stood by the window, holding a tablet against his chest, wearing a satisfied little smile before anyone had even spoken. Arav's father, Devraj, sat at the head of the desk like the room already belonged to him. I set my bouquet down and started reading. By the second paragraph, my stomach turned to ice. Structural liability retroactively assigned to consulting engineer of record. I looked up. Arav was already watching me, jaw tight, one hand curling into a fist. I turned the page slowly. I've always believed silence unsettles powerful men more than arguments do. The document wasn't asking for a formality. It was backdating my name onto safety approvals I'd never given, inspection reports I'd never filed. Meridian Towers kept appearing in the margins, the same site where I'd flagged foundation concerns 3 months earlier, concerns that had quietly vanished from every file since. "This is fraud," I said without raising my voice. Rohan blinked first. Devrad's eyes narrowed. Arav let out a short, disbelieving laugh like I'd committed some minor social clumsiness. "Careful what you say," he murmured. "I never approved these reports," I said, lining the pages up with deliberate precision. "No honest engineer assumes liability without an inspection, a report, and a documented trail. I have none of those because I never wrote them." "Are you nervous?" Arav's charm looked small in that room, stripped of ballroom lighting. "Sign it, we'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll say I already agreed, then that I changed my mind, then that I'm unstable." I set the pen down without touching it. "I've seen this playbook before." Devraj rose slowly, palms flat on the desk. "Girl, you entered this family today. Learn quickly. Some things are handled with trust, not arrogance. Something old surfaced in my memory then. The site foreman on my very first job, laughing, telling me women confuse clipboards with authority. The shake in my own hands afterward. The promise I made myself that fear would never again be allowed near my signature. "Trust isn't obedience," I said, looking between the three of them. "And a wedding doesn't turn a crime into a family favor." Arav stepped closer. "You don't understand what you're doing." There was something almost like disbelief under his anger. He'd expected tears, a trembling hand, maybe an apology. Instead, I gathered the folder and in the same motion, slid free a small printed routing slip that had slipped loose between the pages. One Rohan had carelessly left tucked inside. I folded it into my clutch before either of them registered what had happened. Only Rohan noticed, half a second too late, his face draining of color. "I understand it completely," I said, "which is exactly why I'm leaving." Arav caught my wrist before I reached the door. It wasn't the grip of a man in love. It was the grip of someone who felt robbed. I looked at his hand, then at his face, giving him one silent second to let go. He didn't. He wrenched the door open instead and pulled me back into the corridor, maybe believing the nearness of 300 guests would restore whatever authority he thought he'd lost. It was the worst mistake he made that night. The corridor opened onto the hall through a wide stone arch, and heads had already started turning toward us, drawn by how long we'd been gone. The music thinned. Waiters slowed mid-step. "Apologize to my father," Arav said, his smile twisting. I pulled my wrist free. "I don't owe an apology to a family that tried to make me carry your crime." The slap came fast enough that the whole hall seemed to hold its breath afterward, the sound cutting clean through 300 conversations. Glasses trembled on trays. I heard my mother gasp somewhere behind me. Farah lurched forward and stopped when she saw me lift my chin. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just felt the sting spreading across my cheek, and underneath it, a strange, terrible clarity. I think Arav believed that slap would end things his way. Public humiliation, folding me back into whatever shape he designed for me. But watching my face, I saw something slip out of his grip for the first time. I wasn't broken. I was, for the first time all day, completely certain. I reached up and slid the ring off my finger, slowly enough that the whole room watched the light catch the metal before it landed on the nearest table, beside an untouched champagne flute. "This marriage ended the moment you raised your hand," I said. "Everything else will be handled by lawyers, regulators, and evidence." Arav's mother, Sananda, stepped forward with a practiced, panicked smile. "Meera, darling, let's not turn a private moment into a scene. Don't call violence a moment," I said, my calm cutting deeper than any accusation could have. "Don't call a crime a formality, and don't call me darling again." Farah reached me then, carrying the clutch I'd left near the head table. Inside its lining, stitched in days earlier, on a hunch I hadn't been sure would matter, sat a flash drive holding files I'd quietly copied from a temporary folder on the Kana servers. As security started moving through the stunned crowd toward me, I understood something clearly. Whatever was coming next was only the beginning. By sunrise, a version of the video was already circulating, shaky, incomplete, filmed on 3 different phones, but enough. Enough for anchors to say my name on morning television. Enough for strangers who'd never met me to have opinions about my life. Farah drove us straight from the estate, taking side roads none of us questioned. In the back seat, I held the flash drive and the routing slip like two halves of the same key. "What was in those papers?" Farah asked quietly, watching me in the rearview mirror. It wasn't curiosity. It was disciplined fear. "They wanted my name on reports I never approved," I told her. "They wanted me to be the wall the blame would hit. At a small rented flat 2 towns away, chosen because no Kana driver knew the address, I opened the flash drive on an isolated laptop, the one I only ever used for sensitive audits, no cloud sync, no shared logins. Folder after folder opened up with technical names, dates, abbreviations. Meridian Towers repeated itself across budget files, soil reports, exported messages, multiple versions of the same structural assessment. The first version showed small alterations in load calculations, nothing an unhurried glance would ever catch. The second revealed a supplier switch made right after a risk warning had been filed. The third carried digital signatures from technicians who, according to their own travel records, had been out of the country on those exact dates. "They built this in layers," I murmured to myself. "So if one person noticed something, it would only ever look like a mistake." The routing slip told me something else, something I hadn't expected. A countersignature from an office I recognized from an entirely different investigation. A state prosecutor's office that had tried, 2 years earlier, to build a case against Kana Construction and failed for lack of usable evidence. By evening, a name entered my life that would matter more than I understood at the time. Advocate Nihal Rastogi, a state prosecutor who'd chased Kana Construction for 2 years and failed every time. Witnesses recanting, documents disappearing. One whistleblower quietly transferred to another city with a raise nobody had asked for. He reached out through my lawyer, a sharp, unshaken woman named Devika Oberoi, who'd spent 15 minutes on the phone with me the night before, listening without interrupting, then telling me simply, "File a report, preserve everything, don't stay anywhere predictable." Nihal met us in Devika's office 2 days later, a room with windows facing trees, instead of skylines built to intimidate people. He arrived exactly on time, carrying a thin folder and an expression that asked for nothing in advance. "You want my files?" I asked. "I want to understand if your files can protect people," he said. It didn't fully convince me, but it opened a crack. He told me what the papers hadn't printed yet, that Meridian Towers wasn't just a site with quiet defects on some spreadsheet. 2 entire floors had already been leased to families who had no idea the load-bearing reports behind their homes had been quietly rewritten. A minor tremor 8 months earlier had cracked plaster on the 9th floor, and the incident report attached to it never once mentioned the soil displacement my own original, now deleted assessment had flagged. "They didn't just try to frame you for a paperwork problem," Nihal said, sliding a printed timeline across the table. "They tried to frame you for something that could have gotten people killed if it had gone unnoticed long enough." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." What followed wasn't dramatic. It was slow, careful, unglamorous work, the kind nobody writes headlines about. I cross-referenced my original site reports, still saved in an old personal backup I'd kept out of habit, against the falsified versions on the flash drive. Devika built the legal timeline. Nihal quietly reconnected with 2 former Kana employees who'd left the company under strange circumstances and, for the first time, were willing to talk. Word reached the Kana family fast. Devraj tried, through intermediaries, to offer a settlement generous, quiet, contingent on my silence, and a signed statement calling the wedding night incident a private misunderstanding. I declined without needing to think twice. Arav tried something else, a handwritten letter, delivered through his mother, full of apology and old affection, asking me to remember who we used to be before all this. I read it once, then handed it to Devika to add to the file, not out of cruelty, because I finally, completely understood that every version of him I'd ever loved had been a performance rehearsed for exactly this kind of moment. 3 weeks later, building inspectors. acting on an anonymous safety complaint Nihal's office, and I filed jointly, conducted an emergency structural review of Meridian Towers. What they found matched, almost line for line, my original assessment from 10 months earlier. The residents were relocated within the week. The story that broke after that wasn't about a slap at a wedding anymore. It was about a construction company that had gambled with people's homes, and the one engineer who had refused to let her name be used to cover it up. The courtroom, when it finally came, was smaller than I'd imagined, wood-paneled, quiet, nothing like the theater of the Windermere Ballroom. Devraj sat beside his lawyers, still upright, still certain that presence alone could command a room. Rohan had already taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Arav sat 2 rows behind his father, no longer at the center of anything. When they called me to testify, I didn't reach for notes. I'd spent months learning the shape of exactly this kind of silence, the kind that unsettles more than an argument ever could. I was asked to sign a document assigning my name to safety reports I never wrote, I said, for a building where families were already living. I refused. That refusal is the entire reason I'm standing here today, and not simply a name on a piece of paper someone could have blamed the next time something went wrong. Nihal didn't need to say much more after that. The documents did the rest. Khana Construction lost its operating license in the state within the year. Devraj was formally charged with fraud. Arav, spared the harsher penalties for cooperating early, walked away with his name permanently, publicly attached to a different story than the one he'd imagined for himself. The man who slapped his bride in front of 300 witnesses and then tried to make her carry his family's crime. I didn't go back to consulting for Khana-adjacent firms. I didn't need to. My name, the one nearly buried under someone else's fraud, became something engineers actually trusted again. Not the woman from the viral video, but the one disciplined enough to read every page before she ever picked up a pen. On the anniversary of that night, Farah asked me, half joking, if I still thought about the ballroom at all. I thought about it for a moment, watching the evening settle gold over an ordinary street, nothing like Windermere's chandeliers. I think about the version of me who almost signed, I told her. Not because I was weak, because for one second, I wondered if peace was worth more than the truth. And now I know peace built on someone else's fraud was never peace at all. It was just a longer, quieter version of the same slap. If you liked Meera's story, a girl who stood up to fear and fought for the truth, then please like this video. And if you want to hear more emotional and powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, so the next story reaches you first. Do let us know in the comments, if you were in Meera's place, what would you have done at that moment? See you in the next story. Until then, take care of yourself.